How would Blake have seen through to such a phenomenon as I mentioned, the death of a 6-year-old child?
Because he would see, and there's some lines of history I can't quote exactly from memory, but joy and woe woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. That, in other words, suffering, affliction, disappointment, failure, all these things are an integral part of the drama of our human existence. And without them, there'd be no drama. Let me tell you what would be a simple parable, which I've often thought of. Some very humane, rather simple-minded old lady sees the play King Lear performed, and she is outraged that a poor old man should be so humiliated, so made to suffer. And in the eternal shade, she meets Shakespeare. And she says to him, what a brutal thing that was, what a monstrous thing to make that poor old man go through all that. And Shakespeare says, yes, I quite agree, it was very painful. And I could, of course, have arranged for him to take a sedative at the end of Act 1. But then, ma'am, there would have been no play.
Well,
see my point?
Yes, I see your point. On the other hand, I'm not sure that King Lear wouldn't have preferred that there should not have been a play than that he should have lived through Acts 2 and 3.
But then he would have been a cowardly man, and of course he did in fact have to go through that suffering in order to understand why there had to be a play. And of course in that marvellous speech of his, one of my favourite things in all Shakespeare, you know, when Cordelia, he said, we two will go to prison, you know, and take upon the mystery of things. It's a beautiful phrase and expresses exactly what I mean. This affliction has to be, and that of course is why one is drawn irresistibly, as a Western European, to the Christian faith and to Christ, because this is the central point, the cross. It worked for centuries and centuries, bringing out all the creativity in people, all the love and disinterestedness in people, this symbol of suffering. And I think that's the heart of the thing, and of course it's what has been lost, and why the faith is languishing, because it cannot take in that truth that we can learn nothing. And you know, as an old man, Bill, looking back on one's life, it's one of the things that strikes you most forcibly, that the only thing that's taught one anything is suffering. Not success, not happiness, not anything like that. The only thing that really teaches one what life's about, the joy of understanding, the joy of coming in contact with what it really signifies, is suffering, is affliction.
Now, the paradox, and I've witnessed it twice, people suffering agonies but who are spiritually serene, is it may be easier for people who suffer to experience it than for people who see them suffering.
Certainly. I'm sure it is. I think because, first of all, there's an element you could almost call decency in us, which says, well, I haven't had to suffer that myself, and therefore it ill behoves me to point to it as a blessing.
Yes.
But of course that would eliminate this idea of the cross, which was for everyone. Actually, in every time and every age, this is demonstrated to us, and I think in our time it's been marvelously demonstrated by Solzhenitsyn and the other heroic people from the Soviet labor camps, all of whom say the same thing. The ones that have achieved spiritual perception through it, that there they learnt this point, that it's through the affliction that you can see reality. And that therefore, as Solzhenitsyn himself says in his Gulag book, thank you, prison camp, for bringing this illumination into my life, which otherwise I'd have lost.
Well, a reductionism of that point, however, you wouldn't applaud, namely that Stalin was God's prophet.
No, but he might be God's instrument. In fact, he was, because in history, it's impossible for anybody to function except as God's instrument, because history is the scenario that God's written, and all the parts are necessary, just as the part of Judas was necessary for the incarnation.
Well, if one indulges that kind of predeterminism, one strips that drama of the spontaneity that, for instance, was shown by King Lear, doesn't one?
But the thing is, it's not...
How do you handle that paradox?
It's determinism within the... it's freedom within the context of God's will, which is not the same as determinism. We live to work out a drama, which is God's drama. And therefore, everything that happens to us is in some degree God's will. We are participating in the unfolding of God's will. Supposing it's true, for instance, at this moment, which I think it probably is, that what we call Western civilization is guttering out to collapse. If you take that in purely human historical terms, this is an unmitigated catastrophe. You and I must beat our breasts and say that we live to see the end of everything.
Not quite the end of everything, because the gates of hell will not prevail against it.
But also, historically speaking, what we love is coming to an end.
Christendom.
Christendom, finished.
Which probably has finished.
I think so, most certainly. But the point is that is a catastrophe only to the extent that you don't see it as part of the realization of God's purposes.